What are we talking about today, Tom? Give peeps an idea.
The idea is for us to talk about self-development, I suppose, as a general concept. Perhaps how it relates to physical practice or how physical practice relates to that. The impetus for the conversation is we have spare time, or some of us have spare time because we're in lockdown. So usually when we're teaching in the evenings, we're now free. At least that's the case for me. So we thought we could have a yarn and you and I could kind of go back and forth, share some of our thoughts and experiences, and that we could get Phaon and Langley in as well. A couple of other people that we work with, practice with, converse with to get their experiences.
Cool.
How does that sound?
It sounds good. And we decided to do this because we wanted to have a bit more of a collaborative conversation after recording a round 2 podcast that we did the other day on the topic of self-development. And we got towards the end of it and we started to talk about our own personal experiences and struggles with self-development and of all kinds, whether it's movement, practice, meditation, different things. And we thought that the personal experiences and especially the struggles and things that we've had to overcome are some of the most useful things for people to hear because they can make the connections. So we thought we'll get Tom Langley, another teacher at Movement Studio Praxis, and Phaon, another of yours, to come and so I'm super keen.
Yeah, me too. And you know, like you said, we had a long chat the other day, so maybe we'll end up going over some similar territory. So if that's the case, then bear with me, and you know, if I'm repeating myself, maybe I'll do a better job of it this time than last time, and hopefully the same is the case for you. Yeah. Although I think you were more articulate than I was last time we spoke.
I'll take.
So the format would be you and I are going to talk a little bit for a while. At least this is what my understanding is. And then we'll kind of function as hosts almost as we invite the others in one after another.
Cool.
To get their thoughts and experiences and hear about the challenges they face. So why don't you share, you know, what brought you to the point of thinking about self-development? And I know you're interested in just the concept of flourishing in general, human flourishing in general, movement practice, self-transformation. Yeah, what brought you to that point? Was it something that was always there, or something that required some sort of radical shift or gradual shift in your mode of operating?
For me, I never really into like best version of myself or improving in anything like really disciplined, focused way. Really, I was about 19. Meeting you was a large part of the, you know, kind of journey that I went to finding out more about what's going on in the world, and all the potential lives that you could lead, and you know, hearing other people's versions of lives that they lead, and kind of realizing that you have the power to intentionally determine your outcome if you work towards that and you determine a strategy in your practice. So meeting you really inspired me at the start. A lot of travel inspired me as well. And then something that I also think is not talked that much about, but I think comes into the self-development landscape a lot with people, is whether you're self-developing from a standpoint of abundance and worthiness, or whether you're self-developing from a standpoint of scarcity and unworthiness. Are you trying to improve yourself because you don't feel enough, or because you want to be more competitive in X particular way, or a better movement practitioner, or a better person because you don't feel like you are that? Or do you feel completely contented with yourself and, you know, adding things on top? So that for me personally has been something that I've discovered later, after I initially got into self-development, movement practice, meditation, breath work, understanding self, psychology, philosophy, and it's been a real balance to try and figure out what is, you know, positive striving and improvement, and what negative striving and improvement, because that's probably the hardest balance that I have to say. hardest balance that I find.
Mm. Was there something that happened recently for you to start thinking about that, or yeah, that shifted your perspective?
More of a gradual thing. It wasn't a sudden thing. More of a gradual understanding of, I think it's pretty common for people in the self-development landscape to understand feelings of unworthiness, and people in general, feelings of unworthiness, and wanting to compensate for some particular, holes that you feel are there, whether consciously or unconsciously. And for me, it was the discovery that sometimes I was doing that unconsciously that really led me to want to pull on the string to ask the question, how much of my behaviors are led through unconscious like means? How much of my behaviors are part of myself that I don't want to expand or give more to? And there's that kind of aspect of self-development for me, which is kind of like, how am I getting in the way of myself? And then there's the kind which is more like future looking, thriving, which is what do I want? What kind of life do I lead? What does that look like? What state do I want to be in? So I think for me, it initially started off with that. What state do I want to be in? What is fulfillment? What would fulfillment look like to me? What kind of family would I want to have? Where would I want to live? And then I started to realize that the more like useful thing and more impactful thing to work on was the parts of myself holding myself back from the natural fulfillment and the natural contentness and peace that I could feel if I didn't have parts of myself working against my best efforts to achieve and maintain a positive state.
Yeah, I think the magic happens when you're actually kind of working on both of those things simultaneously. That's at least what I strive for, which is to operate in a way that's creating that future me and perhaps the future little microcosm around me, and maybe even a little bit beyond that, the future my world that I'd like to have exist. But to be operating day to day in a way where that baseline kind of satisfaction and contentment is actually where you're coming from when you're moving through your day in that way. So that there's this, like, you structure your life so that that future is arising or arriving gradually, that future is becoming for you, but that you can be there every day and you can be present every day. And a trick, I was talking with one of the students about this recently. The trick there is to identify yourself not with the thing that you're aiming at in the future, but with the thing that's aiming. Like, you identify yourself with the process of aiming towards something better rather than toward the thing that might come or might not come. And that way you're there all the time, and you can be satisfied all the time with the fact that you're moving forward, or at least moving in the direction that you'd like to. Yeah, that's been helpful for me, because there was a time for sure as well for me where it was just like all hard work. Once I get these things sorted, then everything will be okay. And every, like, successful person, I'm not putting myself in that camp of like well-known successful people, but every time you hear them talk about their lives, they say, oh, I wish I had smelled the roses more, and enjoyed my time more. And it's like, maybe the fact that they didn't is why they were so successful. So it's easy to, like, put in a lot of hard work and then go, man, that way of operating isn't optimal, while leaning on all of the hard work you put in your new, more optimal way of operating. So I'm just wary of that, trying to acknowledge, yeah, there are elements there that aren't for me now, or there's a mode of operating that isn't optimal for me now, but maybe was at that time, and maybe was necessary. I'm not sure.
And I think as well, like, something that what you're talking about reminds me of is something that Tony Robbins said, that was like, you don't own your ideals own you. And I haven't really, like, unpacked it that much, but I think what that means to me now is that the ideals and the expectations that we place upon ourselves to live a life, something combined between like Dave Rastovich, wholesome, surfer, like, living down in, northern New South Wales chilling out, mixed with Tim Ferriss, mixed with, like someone else having an insanely positive impact on the world. Like, I think it kind of skews, it kind of like thickens our expectations of ourselves and what we think is normal. And I think someone that's had a big impact on me is Alain de Botton. And he talks a lot about being contented with just an average life, and expecting suffering and things to not work out, because a lot in the self-development world and the things that we're talking about, I've been exposed to these things through podcasts, through media in general, books as well, but again, it's all just modern new media, and your standards for what your life should be like are I think get viewed in an unrealistic sense. Well, mine do sometimes, and I need to remind myself that, I guess it comes back to gratitude as well, and like perspective. But yeah, the constant striving, and as you're saying, identifying yourself with the goal and not the journey is something that I've found super hard and still do, especially in my training. I feel I'm very impatient to get the thing, and I haven't quite cultivated that ability to just enjoy the practice, and just do the work, not worrying about constantly manifest the end goal the whole time.
Right.
And it's impatience, I guess. It's an impatience to get there. And the other thing is, like, do you have to impatiently strive towards a meaningless goal to stand on top of the meaningless mountain with no meaning to switch off that part of your brain that wants to do it again? Or can you hear people that have been there before and say, it's about the journey, and then just learn to do that yourself? You know what I mean? It's like, can you really learn that without ruining your life for a year while you try and strive for something thing, and then realize, you know what I mean, and teach yourself through failure, kind of thing?
Yeah, I don't know. It's almost like teaching yourself through success, actually, because what happens, and I'm sure this has happened with you, is you're striving, pushing toward a goal, and you achieve it, and then the next day feels very much like the day before. There's
Mm.
there's no party, there's no one popping champagne. It's just like, oh yeah, okay, I'm a little bit better than I was when I set out on this adventure, or maybe I'm not, but the skill I've developed is objectively more difficult, or whatever it is.
Mm.
That your life doesn't change when you achieve the goal. So it's setting goals that change your life now is the way that I think about it, or maybe setting intentions rather than goals, so
Mm.
that the intentions, they frame your perception of reality. They frame how you're experiencing things. Like, I have this intention to move through the world in a certain way. And I don't know how it's going to unfold. And so I have that intention, and I'm like, maybe this. And then reality is like, one arm chin ups for you will probably require lots of injuries. And you're like, well, okay, misplaced intention. But I'm glad I moved in that direction to know more about it. So you kind of do have to move toward the thing and then go, do I want that thing? Do I not want it? It's very easy to just not set intentions, because then you're never disappointed. But I
Mm.
try to operate with more curiosity and exploration. Like, what if I tried to move toward this, or what if I set this as an intention for the year, or for this conversation, or whatever you're moving into? Can I have some effect on how things unfold? And I think
Mm.
that's what's exciting, and it's kind of what you said, touched on very briefly, about discovering your unconscious habits. Is what's exciting is that the answer is yes, is that you can have an effect. Or this is exactly how you started the conversation. You asked that question, maybe my intention can have an effect on how things unfold. And it can, but what you don't know is how much of an effect. And you don't know exactly what the effect will be until you engage in some actual work in the world, some actual action. You act on that intention. And I think many of us get stuck in the place of having some intention that we displace so far off into the future that it never gets expressed. That one day I'd like to do this, or one day I'd like to do that. And it's so ambitious, kind of what you were saying with the ideals, unrealistic
Mm.
standards. It's so ambitious that there's just no way that you can move toward that without some serious breaking down of the goal into sub goals and some serious intermediate steps. And maybe if there are 50 steps between where you think you want to be and where you are, you take 30 of them and realize where you're moving is not actually where you want it to be. But the fact that you took those 30 steps gives you information. You can set yourself off in another direction.
One thing that that prevents me from doing that, or that works, one thing in me that works against that is this kind of like the fallacy of like efficiency, that, you know, like I am at point A and I think like I want to go for one arm chin ups or something like that, or whatever the goal may be. Let's put the one arm chin up one because you explained it well. And my mind will want to try and save the effort that I would put in from 1, 2, 3 steps to then realize, oh, I'm going to injure my elbow. So, like you said, maybe I don't want to pursue one arm chin ups. They're not that important to me. It wants to expedite that process and just assume, or like, yeah, the mind wants to come in and save the effort, save the potential wasted effort. And it happens all the time. Like, I won't want to, yeah, the mind will get ahead of itself. Will try and assume what will happen in the future because I don't want to commit time to, yeah, make a mistake or wasting the energy. And it's obviously a subconscious part of me, because consciously you think mistakes are really the best learning experiences. And if you could realistically charge head on into many mistakes, you'd optimize learning. So it's not the conscious part of myself that wants that. It's the subconscious part. And maybe it's a good time to talk more about awareness, you know, conscious, subconscious, a lot of these, and I said at the start, a lot of the things that prevent myself from being the person to be are parts of myself, right? Like parts from the past or parts of my ego or things like that. And I find that the cultivation of awareness is my first line of defense in not allowing those myself to ruin my best in a
Right. Yeah, and maybe it's like the mistake with the efficiency metric is that it's an acquisition mindset, that you're just acquiring skills. And if the thing is, if you know what you want to get exactly, and then you drive forward and you get it, it's not exciting. There's no adventure. It's just like, so you find these people they're just incredibly strong, to use the one arm chin example again, and they can just pull one arm chins, having never trained them. And so for them, it's like, well, if you could get that skill tomorrow, you wouldn't care about it. If you had it today, having put no work into it, you wouldn't care about it. For me, the movement practice, the physical practice, is about what you uncover about yourself along the way. And yeah, so maybe we can get into that awareness point. Harold left a comment which said attention / intention, finding the balance between the two. And he and I have spoken about that briefly before. And I think hopefully maybe we can get into the awareness conversation and see how attention and intention how those two are playing off against each other in that conversation. Did you have something to say?
No, that you know, the cultivation of attention and how it enables us to change ourselves.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, let's talk about that, because I was hoping to, talk about self-development. It's like, well, what's development and what's the self? And, I think that's a good place to start, is what are we talking about when we're talking about developing ourselves, right? Because you are, and this is maybe a breakdown that you and I have spoken about before, but the way I would think about it is you are a digestive tube. You're a central digestive system that's metabolizing, and that's encased in a body, right? The body comprised of flesh and bone, and that body can move, it senses, and it also desires, right? So it can move toward the things it wants and away from the things that it doesn't want. And that's operated by a nervous system, right? And the primary control center of the nervous system is the brain. So there's a digestive tube encased in a body, operated by a nervous system. And then there's this conscious mind, right? And all of those layers are kind of infused with consciousness. And this is the attention point, is you can pay attention to how eating affects you, right? How the foods you're consuming affect you, if we're talking about the inner tube, the digestive tube. Or you can pay attention to how you're perceiving the world, how you're moving through the world, the things that you're desiring, your needs, what you're moving towards, what you're afraid of, what you're attracted to, repulsed by, and so on. But mostly when we think of ourselves, right, of the self, we're referring to the conscious mind that's kind of sitting above, or like sitting here and thinking about things. The mind that's thinking, right? We tend to think of that as our self, yeah? But that's just one thin slice of what comprises us, a very thin slice. And it's a slice that you can change with intention, right? You can decide to attend less to your thoughts and perhaps more to the feeling of having a spine, for instance, or to what your digestive system feels like by paying attention to that. Or maybe take an example of a single mother with 3 kids. Her self-conception changes to those 3 kids. She's paying so much attention to them and so little to herself that they are now what she really is thinking of and she's operating in a way where that's herself now. So I think the self is malleable, and it's an easy reference for it is what are you attending to? That's yourself, right? So yeah, does that kind of breakdown does that make sense?
For sure. Yeah, of course.
Cool. So I think some definitions, like, okay, what's awareness? Well, if that's what consciousness is, right? It's that thing that pays attention, right? We say something's conscious when, this is the Thomas Nagel definition. He wrote a paper that's quite famous called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" And his definition of consciousness is that there's something that it's like to be you. If you're conscious, then there's something it's like to be you. There's not something that it's like to be a stone, right? But there is something that it's like to be a bat. And there's something that it's like to be you, and there's something that it's like to be me. Consciousness is having an experience, yeah? They're kind of nebulous terms because we still don't really know what consciousness is, but it at least translates it a little bit. So awareness then is consciousness of consciousness, right? So if consciousness is having an experience, then awareness is knowing that you're having an experience, right? It's being conscious of the fact that you're having an experience. And we lose that when we say you lost yourself in something, right? You're no longer conscious of the fact that you're having an experience. And when you come back to your senses, you remember, oh yeah, I'm having an experience here. The emergence of your awareness emerges once more. And that's a Moshe Feldenkrais method. People maybe have heard of that form of practice. That was his definition. Is awareness is consciousness plus knowledge, right? It's not just doing, but it's knowing what you do. And I think that's the first thing in the whole self-development, in this conversation, or the self-transformation conversation, to start to cultivate, is just to start watching yourself, right? Just to start observing how you're operating, observing how you respond to stimuli, right? Things arise in the world and you respond to them in a certain way. Someone calls for me and I get up from my seat, from my cushion, I'm sitting on the floor here, in a certain way. I have a habitual mode of moving in response to a stimulus. Or you say something that maybe threatens my feeling of authority and I respond in another way, right? Or you share a deep truth and I have an immediate habitual mode of responding. And the thing with habits is, and this is exactly what you mentioned before, is we've generally not chosen to develop those habitual modes of responding. They're just, maybe it's something we learned from a parent, or it's something we learned from a mentor, or it's some sort of protective mechanism we developed when we were young and something happened and we responded and it worked, or we got praised for responding in a certain way to how things, to things that arose in our experience. And awareness is simply noticing all of those things. When I do certain things, I'm lifting my shoulders up to me. This is the example I always use because it's so common. I'm lifting my shoulders up and tensing my abdomen while I'm sending a fear response to my body habitually. But I don't know about it until I start putting the attention somewhere else rather than just in the thought stream. or even attending to the thought stream, you start noticing, man, all day long I'm thinking about this, or all day long I'm thinking about that. Or like you mentioned, becoming aware of, I'm moving towards these goals, but I'm doing it in a hateful way, not a like loving way, not an impassioned way, but motivated almost by hatred of myself, or resentment of myself. And you notice that, you discover that, that's how I'm operating. It's like waking up from the dream. Holy shit, that's happening here. That's the development of awareness, like paying attention to your habits. And like I said before, the reason I thought it might be useful to introduce that hierarchy, like that structure to yourself, the inner tube, the animal body, the nervous system, is that all those things are operating, whether you're conscious of them or not. And they're constitutive, I don't know what the word is, constitutive? They're constitutive. They constitute your experience, right?
Yeah.
They're all feeding the conscious thoughts. So you're feeling anxious when you wake up, and then something comes on in the news and your response is it's a fear response because you were already feeling anxious, right? Or maybe there's an afternoon storm and you've just fallen in love, and so the storm is like, it's an opportunity to marvel at the beauty of nature, right? That you've taken this state you're already in out into reality. Or there's an afternoon storm and you've just fallen out of love, and so it's like the gods playing this sick joke on you and laughing at you for the situation you're in, right? Laughing at your misery. And those two things is the exact same thing happening in the world that are interpreted in completely different manners. So just knowing that, and knowing that maybe you're wrong, maybe your interpretation is wrong, maybe your habitual responses aren't optimal, is the first step, right? Notice what you're doing and notice, is it optimal? And rather than just doing it, this is something FM Alexander spoke about as well, wrote about Alexander technique. Some people maybe have heard about that. The book, Feldenkrais, Alexander wrote a lot about kind of cultivating awareness of these sorts of things, perhaps in slightly different terms. But he said you have to, when a stimulus arises, you have to not just let yourself respond in the way that you normally would. You have to insert a pause, right? You pause. Something arises, pause, and watch what you were going to do. Watch how you were going to respond. And just start doing that. And maybe in the beginning you respond how you were going to respond anyway. You pause and you say, fuck it, you said something that upset me. I'm giving you the anger response. But with time you develop the skill, because it is a skill, of choosing a different response and re-habituating yourself, re-patterning yourself, completely transforming yourself from bottom up through repetition, through conscious, deliberate repetition of what might be better or might be optimal, is at least moving you in that direction. And this is the break, this is the wake up moment of that you need to have happen, right? And you see it happen for people and then they just set off in this completely new direction, is the realization that your mode of operating could be wrong, that you could be wrong, because everyone thinks that they're doing the right thing, right? The Taliban thinks that they're doing the right thing. All of their actions make sense according to their belief system, right? And the US Army thinks that maybe they don't think they're doing the right thing, but perhaps the US president thinks he's doing the right thing, right? Everyone thinks that they're doing the right thing, but they can't all be right. We can't all be right. And so instead of just orienting our attention at them, like they're not doing what I want them to do, it's a reorientation back towards yourself and go, what are the ways in which I think I'm right that I could be wrong? What are the ways in which I could be wrong? And it can be as simple as how you pour your cup of coffee in the morning, right? that might be suboptimal. Or how you use your mouse at the computer and it's giving you RSI, to make things really concrete. There's a way that you're operating that maybe is suboptimal there that's causing you harm. Awareness is what allows you to notice that, and then practice, and this is why we care about practice and get obsessed with it, is the mechanism that makes it possible for you to build a new habitual response. And you don't need to override forever, because at some point, what felt wrong but was right feels right. Right? It's like good posture. Good posture for someone who's got bad, so-called good posture, for someone who has so-called bad posture, feels terrible. It feels wrong, right? So how could it be right? Everything is like that. Everything is potential like that. And we don't know. That's where the exploration comes in. We don't know what's optimal. We don't know what's right. But you tend to have a sense of what's better, right? Because you insert the pause and maybe you respond to your partner's concern with compassion rather than with resentment or anger or impatience, very common. And that has a positive effect on your relationship. Holy shit, that response was better. That response was more optimal. Maybe I'll try it again, and maybe I'll try it again, and maybe I'll try it again. Because you're always getting feedback from reality, feedback from the world about whether the changes you're making are right or not. Which is why setting out on a clear journey where you know exactly where you're headed doesn't work.
Yeah, I think there's obviously like a lot of benefit to awareness as commonly cultivated through meditation, but I think it kind of needs to be balanced out with some kind of knowledge or some kind of some kind of information that you take in. I didn't know what meditation was until I heard about it, right? Until the knowledge came in first, and then I decided to act upon it and start to cultivate awareness. And we might not even know the things that we are doing that are sabotaging our best efforts, or the parts of ourselves that feel unworthy, or the parts of ourselves that we want to overcome to be better. It's kind of hard, in my experience, to know what they are without hearing someone else's experience. And it's funny because all of the things that I understand about myself are kind of things that I've heard other people talk about that I've tried on and been like, yeah, I think that's me too. And it's like, I could have done that if I had sat in meditation from ages, 7 till 21 or 7 till 30 and just watch all of my neuroses like emerge as I became older. I would have no reference point to tell that they were neuroses or that they weren't normal. And hearing people say, I was compensating for a lack of feeling worthy by trying to succeed desperately in this world through some particular way. And you try it on and you're like, oh, that's kind of in this way, but maybe not. I feel like you have to have that bit as well as the awareness, because the knowledge points in a direction and you can go and test that out. And I think this is probably a good time to bring on like Phaon or Tom Langley to give us, some more experience from their point of view in terms of troubles and experiences that they've had along the way in terms of self-development.
I agree, 100%. Yeah, all I would say there is that's why having teachers is useful, because the teacher's primary role is to reorient your awareness and to say, hey, maybe look over here. And also just having good people who you actually listen to, like good friends, good family who you can be honest with. That's why honesty is so valuable. Who will say to you, hey man, I could be wrong about this, but maybe X, Y, or Z. And then that you don't go, but instead you go, maybe, maybe, let me think about it. But yeah, I think that's a great idea. Hopefully Phaon is, I'm not sure how to, can he request? Phaon, are you there?
If Phaon is there, request to join.
Wouldn't it be a shame if he just like left? Very possible that he did.
Yeah.
Just call me when you're when you need me.
Oh.
Hey guys.
Oh. Hey Phaon.
Hey. Am I coming through fine?
Yeah. You've got, you look like Jesus. You've got a light right above your head.
This is what it's like when you become enlightened.
Yeah, good. Yeah. I can't wait.
How do I fix this? Hold on, maybe I'll get in a better position.
Yeah, that's better. You look far less enlightened, but too bad. Your face is more enlightened.
To engage in this conversation, I have to come back down to human level.
Bodhisattva. Yeah, of course. Very giving of you, fam.
Where do you want to start? I've been listening for long. I think it's been like quite interesting, especially how you define the self and your take on self-development. I don't think I've heard it framed that way, almost like from a biological standpoint, as you started, to then piecing that towards consciousness, and then being conscious of consciousness. That makes a lot of sense, and I think you discussed a lot about what I deem as almost like the first step, right, which is becoming awareness and then catching yourself at the response, um, or the reaction stage, so that you can respond, right? And I think that development then is all about creating better actions, right, from what you may be used to be doing. Or it's like creating a fork in the road, right, where it's like, oh, I used to do that, but now I can do this. And that can be a little decision, or sometimes in your life it can be like a huge decision, right? And when you make that choice, it's like, like there's this huge wave of energy or relief, and then you're like, okay, this is what all that self-development stuff is about. So I don't know, Tom, Pat, where do you think we should head with this conversation?
Well, I thought asking you the same sort of question as I asked Pat at the very beginning, which was there, clearly that's happening for you. Was there a time where that started happening a lot, where you were becoming more aware and being more autonomous, essentially, being more deliberate with the choices you were making, the actions that you were taking? Was there something that caused that to happen? Often it's just before you actually let you answer the question. Often it is coming from a place of deficit. You mentioned that before, Pat. Like many times for people who are in pain, for instance, or they have injuries that keep popping up, or they're just suffering a lot in their lives, it becomes clear that how they're operating isn't working. So that beginning from a place of deficit, you could be in a place of deficit, you could be in a place of suffering, or of causing harm to yourself or others, but often it's not as painful as that, and the process begins in a different way. So how did it kick off, do you think, for you, Phaon? Was it something that's always been there?
I think it was through the process of adolescence, like growing up in like my household, autonomy was very low. You know, I had quite a strict upbringing, Asian parents. Like I was groomed to be a high performer. I had to do swimming training morning and evening. I had to practice flute and piano. I had to get top grades. I was just on autopilot, really, because that was just my reality of going, okay, like I needed to do well. I didn't even really question it. It was just like, this is just what I have to do.
Mm.
And I think I started gaining more awareness towards like the end of year 11 and 12, where suddenly these routine habitual uh, actions or activities that I would be doing, such as the music or the swimming, they started dropping away because I was focusing on my studies. And then so suddenly when such a big part of that starts disappearing and you start prioritizing, you're like, okay, was that so important anymore that I did like all that swimming and waking up 4 a.m. in the morning all the time? And then now it's just like, I don't do competitions anymore. So you're like, what was the point of that? And then so maybe I got a little bit disenchanted for a bit, didn't do physical activity for a while. You start asking some questions, but still during that period, you're still very in a quite controlled environment, right? I just got my studies on my mind, want to complete year 12, do the best that you can. You do that, got a really good result, and then it's suddenly university, right? And it's like, okay, the choice is yours. The world is yours. You got to make all the decisions in your life to decide who you want to be. And I think it's like at that point where you're like, hang on, what the hell? Like, I don't know anything. Like, all my decisions have been kind of made for me, and now I'm supposed to just decide, like, what am I supposed to do? And sometimes you go to these career advisors as well, and they're supposed to guide you. And that was like not really helpful at all, because I don't think like the questions being asked were probably appropriate or reflective enough, or the journey of how they took you along didn't give you enough empowerment or put you in a position to be like, okay, like I can start making these like what it felt very big decisions for myself. So I think I made a sort of like half-assed decision as to what I wanted to do at uni, but it was really during university that I started formulating more of my views, because suddenly, well, one, my parents completely stepped off the pressure pedal once I made it into university. So it was sort of like all the decisions that I could make were really my own. I might be lucky because I had two younger brothers, so my mum started concentrating on them. Which is fortunate for me, unfortunate for them, I guess, where suddenly I was like, oh, okay, like I'm in this new institution now where teachers are telling me you can come to class, but no one's really checking, so maybe the choice is actually really yours. I didn't get any pocket money, so I had to start working. So it's like, okay, what job am I going to do? How am I going to generate income so that I can start doing these other activities? And so I think with that opportunity of choice, that's when I was really starting to, yeah, it was challenging, I think, at the time, but that's where I started developing this curiosity of going, okay, well, what do I actually really want to do? And it's taken me a really long time to become comfortable with answering that question more and more. You know, all throughout my 20s, I'd be reflecting this question, going like, oh yeah, who do I want to be? What do I want to become? Finished uni, I would be like, I was like, maybe I should know the answer to this question now. I got these degrees now. Now it's like, oh, what job do you want? And it's the same thing again. It's like, okay, am I going to be doing this job for the rest of my life? It's like, it feels like the same pressure, but you do it. And I like what you were saying before, Pat, about like making mistakes, and then learning from the mistakes as well, because yeah, you just have to do that, right? So maybe the first job you enter into is not the best job, and that's a mistake. And you know, when you do these jobs at the start, they're like 1 year type ventures as well. We talk about training mistakes. Sometimes you might recover from an injury 1, 3, 6 months. Like sometimes when you're in a job, you can get like stuck in there for years, right? Before you have this light bulb moment of awareness and go, oh, like I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. It's normally like for me, it's you talked about how feeling can be confusing, Tom, I think, where you were saying that like for the person with bad posture, it doesn't feel great to be in good posture at all. And I would delineate, yeah, like the physical feeling with intuitive feeling, because for me, I've really gained more trust in terms of my intuitive feeling to lead me with curiosity as to where I want to focus my attention and energy to learn to develop the self, if we want to use that sort of terminology. And maybe that's something that at the start of my life, like I didn't really have any domain of ownership on, right? Because my decisions were just made for me. And then throughout uni, I was starting to maybe not wanting to, I didn't really have the sense to trust myself, or I didn't have this sense of listening more intuitively to me, because let's face it, in university as well, you're going out a lot, you're drinking, your intuitive self is masked and under a haze of party, really. But even through that, it does start like developing, I think. And I did start having this curiosity, because, you know, that's when I started physically developing myself as well, finding the gym. I entered in a few self-development courses. There was a particular men's self-development course as well, which was very, very integral for my growth, because it did show me the value of relationship, of mentors, the value of meditation as well. That was when I was first was started getting introduced into it, and so somehow through that haze, intuitively, I was drawn to some of these subjects. I don't know why. Maybe I think there was some books as well, such as I'm sure you guys know, like Tim Ferriss's 4 Hour Work Week, seminal textbook. When I read that, that sort of just lighted my eyes to like the possibilities of the world. And I think that's where, when you have that sort of break within your belief system with that, you're like, oh, okay, like you can design your life. Like I never thought of it like that. Like you can design your life to just work 4 hours. Like, I mean, initially that was kind of like the goal as per the book, but you were like, okay, that's like a radical idea. Like no one ever talks about that, but this guy's talking about it. Maybe I need to be like considering things a little bit differently. And so you go through these stages like that where I think, yeah, your beliefs break. And then for me, that curiosity has just developed more and more and more.
Yeah, I think it's important to acknowledge that as long as you're asking that question of like, well, what do I want to do? Which direction do I want to move in? You're still moving in the direction that you were already moving in. So you've got all this inertia behind you of all the things that were perhaps drilled into you almost growing up. And well, you leave having graduated high school and done well in college, and now you go into a law degree because that's what you do, and then you achieve, and that, you've kind of got all this inertia pushing you forward for as long as you're asking that question of where you want to go without actually answering it. And I think lots of people are in that position of asking, and not being satisfied with the direction they are moving in, but finding themselves still moving in that direction. And what I see often, and I know you had a bicycle trip that maybe had an impact, is that often there's an experience or there's something that breaks that inertia or puts it on hold, where you find yourself in a different context, or for different people who do different things. Maybe they fall out of a relationship, or they finish a degree, or they start, there are all sorts of these sharp shifts in one's life. But I think those breaks where you actually pause that inertia and again insert some space, you give yourself some space, or you're forced to take space, however it arises, then you can perhaps, if you can take advantage of that, then it's a beautiful.
Hold on, I gotta.
That's okay. If you can take advantage of that, of those little breaks.
I'll be back.
No worries. I'm just holding you, Pat.
Wow. I think we should also get Tom on too to share his experience.
Do you want to do a 4 at a time?
I can do 3.
Okay.
We want to get Tom Langley on too. We got just under 10 minutes to hear his experiences. I want to ask you one question.
I think we can go longer than last. I did a chat the other day and it was an hour 40.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so I think we're gravy.
Oh, swag.
I could be wrong. I mean, if we drop out at 8 o'clock, then we'll just drop out in the middle of some rant and so be it. But I think we can go longer.
You can just restart up after, like if it drops out as well.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, don't be booting Phaon out so quickly.
I
wanted to
ask you. Go on, Tom.
Well, I wanted to ask about that trip, whether there was a shift there for you, where having space from all the people that you were in the habit of being around, because this is a huge part as well. It's like everyone's expecting you to continue operating the way you have. So there's all those forces moving away from the direction that you might want to go in, or pushing you to continue in the same direction you're going in. So was that a pivotal experience?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. That trip for me is going to be life defining, right? Like even as I go into older age, I will always keep on like drawing from the richness of experience that I did for that. And I guess for the people that are listening there, they might not have this context, but was it 4 years ago? That's when I decided to quit my full-time job, like quite a happy sort of I was just living in a share house in inner city Melbourne. I had a good job. Everything was going sort of well, but I had a sort of deeper calling within me. Calling. I can't quite yeah, it's hard to describe, but I just knew that I didn't want to continue on with that particular experience, and I had this curiosity to explore, right? And then so I ended up doing a 2-year bicycle trip around China and Japan, of all things. And in terms of that, and you mentioned inertia, right? And that normally blocks us from taking such radical choices such as that. Like whenever I mention that to someone, you always hear that people can't imagine taking that type of choice. And I probably couldn't have imagined taking that type of choice before as well, because quitting your full-time job, that sense of safety, it is very confronting, right? And I think I was just in a very like unique place in my life where when I went so before that trip I went on a small little work trip across to London, and then on the way back I went to Japan for the first time, and I traveled around there. And I remember it was just like one point when I was wandering through the streets of Kyoto, where I was just like, I want to spend some more time here, and I got to just make it happen like this. And I can't describe exactly how it happened, but I suddenly had this uncovering where like I wanted to embody the Nike slogan, just do it. It was all about, you talk about like self-development and developing the awareness, right? So I had this awareness that um I knew that I couldn't keep on doing what I was currently doing, but I didn't know the action to take exactly. I was still trying to uncover that. And it was just on this trip where I was just walking around by myself on the streets of Kyoto, where I had this sense of space where I was suddenly like, okay, like I gotta, I gotta do things. And I remember I didn't even know what to do, but I was just so committed to action. I was just like, okay, I'm just gonna do things. And then throughout the next few weeks, that's when I started writing out this whole list of all these actions, right? And I just sat down, and one of them was like, yeah, spend more time in Japan, and the other one was like, do a bicycle trip. There were other crazy ones such as like ride a donkey across China. I didn't end up doing that, but I picked
There's
I
still
picked out
time.
some.
There's still
Yeah,
time.
there is still time there. I still got that list as well. So
Nice.
um,
Hmm.
yeah, when I came back, I was just really clear. I was like, okay, this is just what I have to do. What's the plan to put that into action? And then I did it. And I was just really, but I remember when I started putting that plan into action as well, there was definitely pivotal moments where it was like, okay, am I committed to actually carrying out this plan of action? So I had to tell my housemates that I wasn't going to extend the lease anymore because I was going to move back home to my parents, So that was like almost a bit of a step back, right? You're like suddenly living with your friends in this awesome share house, and then you're going to move back to your parents to save up as much money as you can, right? And it's like, okay, got to do that. Then you got to tell work that you're gonna you're gonna do this, and it's for this ridiculous reason, right? And you're feeling a bit nervous, and you're like, okay, like, am I really serious? Because suddenly you're making like a social contract with everyone around you that you're committed to action. and and then it was like, okay, if I'm really serious about this, I got to start learning the language so that I'm not just like stranded out there and have no help. And that's hard because suddenly now you have to start an entirely new practice, which takes time and energy, and you have to be committed. It's just like starting out new training program and upping that, right? But it's like a completely new area which you suck at, and you gotta create a whole learning curriculum for as well. So there were some points there, but I just I had that list, and I had that slogan, just do it, and I kept on returning back to it. And I was just clear. I was like, okay, like that is what I want to do. And yeah, during that time as well, I was actually very, very like heavily in the practice of meditation and awareness. So like I think during that time I would be meditating anywhere between like 20 to 40 minutes per day. And this was like all throughout the bike trip as well. Like I would always start off my morning with a very like I was quite strict actually with my morning routine, but I found that I had to be because I was changing so many times to places of where I would wake up. I would never know where I would wake up because I was camping in my tent, and you'd wake up in this foreign country in this like strange place, right? But then I knew that if I was starting off with some breathing, meditation, then study Japanese, move my body a little bit, no matter where I was, I still had that, so I was okay. And I think, yeah, that coupled with this experience of when you have time on the bike, it almost is like this moving meditation because sometimes like you don't have to do too much. You just like riding. You don't have like if it's not a real mountainous road, you're just like riding straight. It's a very like you, it's not like you can zone out, but then there is something about this pace where because it's new stimulus as well, you're kind of very aware, um, and you're just like in this seat pedaling of awareness sometimes for like 8 hours, for like 12 hours. So I've had these like really beautiful moments all throughout there where when I reflect on it, I can't say that those years flew by. What I can say is like I remember checking in with myself throughout all that period, going like, oh, like I'm actually really here all the time. Like this is happening in real time. And so yeah, I'm not sure where I'm going with this, but in terms of like so
It's real.
so
It's really inspiring, man. That's a really
yeah,
inspiring story. Like that's
yeah.
that's a big that's a big shift and a big moment to make a decision like that, and just go, I'm doing this. I'm doing it. I'm doing it. I'm doing it. Um, Gives me tingles, man. It's so cool that you did that. And you still got that list, and you just set out in that direction. And I think it can be. You spoke about cultivating intuition, right, and starting to respond to shift. What do I actually like? There's this voice in the back of your head saying, "What do I actually want to do? Where do I actually want to go?" And you do meet those decision points, or you can make them arise for yourself, where you just go, "Am I going to move in a direction that's prompted by my fear, or am I going to move in a direction that's prompted by that curiosity or excitement about how things could be? Am I afraid of how things are going to be, or am I excited about how things could be?" And I feel like almost every big decision, but almost every decision is like that. It's either fear, close in, protect yourself, or like love and excitement and open out and expose yourself, right? Every moment you have a decision to make, you have that choice if you can cultivate the awareness. And I think, unfortunately, for most of us, we're in the habit of the fear response because does feel safer. You mentioned security, the safety of the job that you had. It feels safer to not take a leap. It feels safer to there's a threat out there of how things could go wrong, and you know how things will go if you don't make this new decision or set off in this new path, because that's how things have gone for the last 4 years, and you're miserable. But you go, well, I'm afraid of how things could go wrong because I know this world that I'm actually not happy with. I'm used to it, right? But I think reframing it as you might be just as afraid of being in that exact same job for the next 10 years. If you think about that, if you think of it as, could I take this job today or make this other decision? Like it's a brand new decision every day, then that really can shift things. And I would encourage, this is something that I started doing essentially when I started making decisions in the way you were describing, when you started doing that in university in particular, is noticing, well, which force is at play in this potential path and which force is at play in this path, and just deciding not to take the fear motivated path almost every time, like as often as possible. Whenever I'm aware and notice that's what's happening, okay, I'm not going to respond out of fear. I'm going to respond out of love instead, and out of excitement and passion and curiosity. And I'm getting away with it so far, and it sounds like it's working for you too. So that can be, it's such an easy heuristic to apply to just, the thing is, we're good at tricking ourselves, deceiving ourselves, like you said, with the, you know, what feels wrong could be right and vice versa. That you'll say, oh yeah, but this is the reason I do that. And actually I really like the job and it gives me all these benefits. You have all these reasons, but if you really boil it down and really pare it back and giving yourself time for yourself, like you were describing on the bike, which is such a luxury and something that you do have to make happen. I had it with the hours of physical practice. It's so much time alone that you start developing a real understanding of how you operate. To pare that back and go, man, no, I'm gonna just, it's a leap of faith. Like I'm gonna move in this way. I'm gonna operate in this way and see what happens. And it seems to be better when you do that. That's been my experience.
Yeah, I agree with especially on that fear-based or fear-driven decision making, and how the logical, rational mind can make the most powerful narratives to support that. And that's where I think, yeah, we have to be careful with this the terminology of feeling, because yeah, there's these layers of feeling there as well, right? Where you can be like, oh, that feels then that I should be doing this decision, and I've got this logical 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 point of list of why I should be doing that, right? If you pair that back to like like me deciding to go on my bike trip, right? I could have had a million reasons to stay, right? Like financial security, seeing all like my friends with like they started getting married, with all having kids, that sort of thing. And then there's like bike trip where maybe there was like one on the list which is like I just want to do it. On the logical rational scale doesn't make any sort of sense, right? But when you start like getting a trust in terms of the intuitive self, I think you know what you need to do, right? And people always say about this, about the gut feeling, and it is hard to tune into that gut feeling as well, because I do believe that over years of like narrative psychosis almost, you can lose touch or sense of this intuitive sense, and it does actually almost deserve a practice in itself, in terms of going, okay, like I'm going to listen to my intuitive self, and I'm not going to be putting these boundaries, these mind boundaries that I'm used to operating in to determine my decision making. I practiced this quite a bit when I was doing my bike trip, because like in the first part of it, I was quite fearful in terms of where I was going to go, because it was like very uncertain. In middle of China, I was kind of like, oh, like where am I going to go? What happens if it's not safe or anything? But then as I got more experience there, and I started like really aligning to this narrative, going, okay, where there are roads, there are people, and where there's people, I'm going to be all right, because I trust in people and I believe that people are good. So then I was like, okay, maybe I don't need to just plan out my trip all the time as to where I'm actually going to go. I'm just going to go where I feel like I'm going to go. And then you're like, oh, okay, like where am I going to actually go? And it's hard at the start, because you're like, literally, there's like different ways where you can take. And I made like terrible mistakes there where I like got stuck, and it was like on the other side of the mountain, and there's no other way back other than going back the way that you came, right? And that sucks. But that was just like, I was like, okay, I'm going to start trying to make decisions led by where I feel would be interesting, rather than going on Google Maps and trying to trace the most efficient line from A to B. That was actually, yeah, probably from the second month onwards where I started doing more of that.
And it was interesting that it was premised on this decision that the world was a safe place for you, that it was a home for you, right? Well, there are people, I'll be okay. Wherever there are people, I'll be okay. That could not have been the case. It could have been that where there are people, you're in danger. But that's, it falls into that category of, no, actually the place is, it reorients you toward how things could emerge. And again, it's an opening out. The world is home for me. It's a playground. I can explore rather than having to have everything planned out and be certain that things will unfold in the way you apparently would want them to, or someone else would. Pat, do you think it's a good time to chuck?
Yeah. I only budgeted an hour for this, so I am in need of some dinner. But maybe it'd be a good time for me to swap out.
Swap out.
With Tom, yeah, and I'll follow along while I'm cooking my dinner, so you guys don't have to watch me cook. So
okay. Well, Phaon, will you stay on and you and I can talk with Mr. Langley?
Yeah, for sure.
That'd be
Awesome.
cool.
All
Alrighty,
right.
dudes. Lots of
Pat.
love. Thank you so much for your story, Phaon. They were lovely.
Thanks, Pat, for organizing this.
Cheers. I'll catch you guys soon.
All right. Enjoy your meal.
Thanks, dudes.
Okay. Let's how do I get? Oh, you just became much larger for me. Let's invite Tom. Hey
guys, how's it going?
All right. How are you?
Wow. I'm great. I'm sitting here in I've just moved into a new house. Got this nice plant behind me. Feeling good.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but you're getting like all these love hearts kind of like shoot up beside you.
Hey,
yeah, someone's very happy that you're here.
Yeah.
Have you been listening in, Tom?
I have. I've been here the whole time. It's been beautiful. I didn't know anything about that bike trip, Phaon. That's awesome. Yeah, what an amazing experience.
I do recommend that is one of the most optimal ways to travel for a very long time if anyone is interested.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Pat sent some love hearts.
Oh, that makes sense. Hi, Pat.
So Tom, what I guess same question that I started with the other two is like, how did things kick off for you? I've been around for and witnessed a radical transformation in you, and you have too, and you've been responsible for it. So I'd be curious to hear about that. And one of the things I wanted to ask you about specifically, and we touched on it a little bit with Phaon, which is as you started changing, how did people around you respond, and how have you dealt with that? Because I think that's when I said fear, I think most people are afraid of other people and how they'll respond to your shifts. So I think that would be an awesome place to start. But perhaps just start with, how did things kick off for you?
I've been thinking about this a bit actually, and recently it occurred to me that really for a lot of my approach to self-development, it really does come from this place of what you guys were talking about before, this really curious place. And part of that's because of this experience I had when I was it must have been year 7 at school. I decided that I wanted to learn guitar because it seemed like it was cool. So I set aside I think I was doing piano lessons at the time, and I was bored with it, didn't like it, but my parents were insistent I did some sort of music. So I said, okay, let's do the guitar because at least I can be a rock star then, that'll be cool.
Yeah, piano's
and I remember
as cool as guitar.
No,
unless you're really good at it.
Yeah. And I remember I started playing, and I had the first lesson, and of course I was shit. I was really bad. My fingers hurt. I sucked, and I was like, I can't even do this. This is terrible. And I remember deciding after a few weeks, I think I had weekly lessons, if I remember correctly. And after a couple of weeks of just seeming like I wasn't improving, I just decided, okay, well, this is shit. It's not what I thought. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to quit, but I'll quit at the end of the term. So I'll give it until the end of the term, and then I'll stop. And then I forgot about, I don't know, like I got to the end of the term, didn't even think about the fact that I wanted to quit because I practiced, and what I decided to do was give it my all. Like, okay, I'll try, but only till the end of the term, then I'll stop. And then it's now nearly 20 years later, and I've played every day since, right? So it's like that experience really kind of highlighted to me the importance of practice and making a decision and realizing actually it's going to feel like you've been describing. It's going to feel a bit shit, to begin with. You're going to feel terrible at it. You're going to feel like, this isn't what I imagined, the rock star at all. This is like, I can barely touch the strings. And I can barely play. How am I supposed to get to that thing that I'm imagining? And then kind of shifting that from learning to just love the actual practice. And then I guess for me, that was probably my first experience of that. My first experience of what is arguably self-development. Like I had a skill that I wanted to learn, and didn't know it at all, and then started to learn it and kind of went from there. And I think over the next sort of 10, 15 years, I kind of went more and more away from the physical and more into my mind, and more learning. Learning for me was very much sitting down, writing, like those sorts of words and maths and physics and science stuff. I went into science after school and into uni as well. And what I had this experience again. I probably described this before, I think, on a podcast with Pat, where at some time in uni, I suddenly realized that I was not my physical body wasn't able to do things that I thought it should be able to do. And again, I had this like switch in my mind where I went, hang on, this isn't right. I want to do something about this, and decided to put some attention in. And I just essentially noticed and brought my attention and awareness to something that had been happening for years, actually, but I just hadn't noticed it. I actually was having a good time. I didn't really feel that bad. Wasn't having a negative experience until suddenly this moment, I was like, hang on, this isn't right. I have to change something. And then again, it was that real curious, well, what's possible? What could be possible for me? I don't even know. Like, what could I do? And I just sort of went around looking at different art forms, looking at dance, looking at capoeira was a big one for me. Just seeing people doing capoeira really inspired me. And for me, it was really this sort of, well, I never thought of myself as being able to do any of these things. But like, what if I could? Like, what if I actually like, why not just see, just go towards it and just see what happens. And it was around this time, Tom, that I met you. Was when I was kind of in this what if stage of I'm specifically speaking about movement practice at the moment, but it was around that time that I met you, and just sort of found this thing that, pulled on this thread of movement practice that really felt like it was not only, like, for me, it was never really about the goal of being able to do a handstand, or about the one-arm chin, or any of the skills that we were discussing, right? You guys were discussing right at the beginning of this. It was just always, well, what if? Like, what's possible? Like, what could I do if I just practice a lot? What could happen? Maybe I could become a rock star.
Mm-hmm.
And it was to kind of lead this into what happened in terms of my, the people around me and all of those sorts of things changing, and the fact that I was changing significantly. It led to me doing all these things and changing my physicality, and kind of changing, I really massively shifted what my attention was focused on and what was important to me. I changed. I was doing quite well high up in the public service, getting paid lots of money, doing, being successful in that sense of the word. But again, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel similar to what you were talking about, Phaon. It was like, it just sort of, people didn't quite understand why, but I was like, oh, I'm actually just going to quit. I eventually quit that and left and did something else for a while, and just really focused on this thing, the movement practice, and because it was giving me some sort of, I don't really, it was because it was allowing me to follow this curiosity, right? Follow something that was curious, that I was curious about, that could kind of felt like it was leading me somewhere. And I guess what started happening was that people around me, the people who I was spending most of my time with, started to change quite significantly. And it wasn't that I lost friends or you know, wasn't necessarily a negative experience, but I just started just noticing that I was very drastically changing those, you know, those 5 people, you know, that common thing you hear, the people you spend, the 5 people you spend your most time with, you're going to be like. And I just sort of suddenly shifted that. And it was really, I mean, talk about this sort of fear response, like this part of the change was really quite challenging, because, you know, this also, you know, I can't say directly that my movement practice led to an end of a relationship. I don't think that's true, but this shift in me certainly did. And like, there was a lot of fear around letting that go. There was a lot of fear around the huge change that ending the end of that, you know, 10-year relationship meant for me. And it was really, you know, it closed me up for a while. It was really hard. It was really kind of, you know, where I had been opening and curious and, you know, going towards this thing, it kind of, when we got to a point with it where I was kind of like, oh shit, you know, what's happening here with the what people are thinking of me, and all these people that I love that are, now I'm changing, and so they're kind of pushing back on me a little bit, and or a lot in some cases. Do I really believe this? Like, is this really what I'm wanting to keep doing? And you know, it actually can be quite hard to talk about. I'm finding it kind of like losing my place a little bit here, because it's sort of like still a little bit of a sore point for me, this stuff.
I was conscious of that, asking the question. So
Yeah.
fair enough. But what would you say, because I think it's courage that is required to continue when you're like, am I right here? Am I not? There's a bit of what Phaon's talking about, the intuition, trusting oneself. I think it's courage that maybe moved you in the direction that, at least I think, is the right direction, and I'm sure you think you've moved in. You're
I
in a
do,
better
yeah,
place.
absolutely.
Do you think that's what it was? Is there something you can put your finger on?
Well, it was actually, you know, all this fear that I'm describing, and this like this you know, this sensation that I had initially of opening, and then the closing, and then noticing the closing and what the closing was happening in response to, and then kind of, you know, spent a little bit of time in that closed position, right? It was hard, it was difficult, but then kind of bringing my awareness back to it and really noticing what those things were, and going, oh, well, hang on, the things that I'm closing towards here, I think this is actually the path. Like, this stuff is actually, it's actually what I need to go towards in order to continue on this opening. And for me, that's sort of been a really important lesson in overall in all of my self-development, is like, you know, that same closing that I had with the guitar playing right back at the start. I literally decided, nah, this is too hard. I'm scared of this. This isn't, you know, I can't play in front of people. Like, this is, no. So I closed and made the decision, I'll stop. And then kind of practiced a bit, and then went, oh, actually, and then opened, and then it kind of led me in a place that I wanted to go to with that. And so I think that was really, you know, took a little bit of time and a fair bit of you know, help and from people around me, and, you know, also meditation practice and all these sorts of things we've been discussing already. But I think the lesson here, or the thing that I think is important from this, is that bringing awareness to what it is that's making this sort of sensation of closing, or this fear, like what it is that you're scared of, and like interrogating that, and finding a way to move towards the thing that you're fearful of, in a way that's not, you know, you're not just being naive and an idiot about it, right? Because fear is there for a reason. It's to, you know, there to protect you. So there's like a purpose to it, but kind of moving towards it in a way where you go, well, hang on, you know, here is some the fear here is a signal for a place that I can develop myself. And I think that's been the really important lesson all the way through.
Yeah, it's the curiosity thing again, actually playing with that, right? Rather than,
Yeah.
Of course, fear creates something that's frightening. It creates an emotional. It's aversive, right? So the natural response is to move away. But if you can be curious and just wonder and play with it, and then maybe part of this is where imagination comes in. Like maybe then you were projecting the actions you would take that were fearful, the closing actions, forward, and imagining the kind of life you would be leading if you kept making those decisions. And then on the other shoulder, you're projecting forward and imagining the life you'd live if you kept making decisions in the other direction instead. And you compare those two places and you realize, oh, I definitely want to move in this direction. Or I definitely want to move in this direction, not in this direction, in this direction.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, because imagination, like that's a special capacity we have, right? To project forward and imagine how things could be. Like we use the intellect to see how things are. And that's really, really important. And it's awareness as well to understand how things are, to see how they are. And then we have this capacity to imagine how they could be. And then creativity, creating. That's what takes you from this understanding of how things are toward the thing that you imagined could be. And that creative process, because it is a creative process, it's a self-creation. And every creative process, if it's genuinely creative, doesn't have a fixed outcome, right? That's what makes it creative. You're creating something new, so you don't know the direction it's moving in. But that's power, man. Like that's empowerment is creating, creating yourself, right? That's autonomy. That's the expression of this special faculty we have. And I really think that's what it's like to, when I feel the most alive and feel the most kind of human, it's when I'm operating in that manner, when I'm moving through the world in that way, this creative way, imagining how could things be. Let's curiously pull back the curtain and see what unfolds. Yeah. Phaon, did you have any questions for Tom, or Tom, do you have any for Phaon or for me? Or
And so you guys mentioned, I mean, talking about, and I've said this term as well, like curiosity, right? So I think that's like somewhere where I want to unpack it a little bit, like because it sounded like for you, Tom Langley, that you had this curiosity with the guitar, and that sounded like from a young age as well, right? So yeah, I wonder what it is about this like curious energy. Where does this come from, and how does it keep on getting sustained, like for all of us as well? Because it seems like this is what sort of orients like, or how we've aligned our orientation of intention toward a lot of our practices, right? With a lot of open curiosity rather than going, okay, fixed outcome, fixed goal, which sometimes I don't necessarily actually think that's a bad thing as well. Sometimes you need to be really clear with going like, I just need to do this and get this done and do that, right? But for say like movement practice and longevity, that's more like this curious orientation, which is probably going to serve us a lot better. So yeah, I just wanted to gather your guys' thoughts in terms of curiosity and the manifestation of curiosity. Is it somehow through our practices that we have practiced curiosity so that we keep on being like more curious? Or is curiosity like an inherent human nature that that occurs with people, or does that occur in differing levels to in people as well? And so then people are driven to different lengths to unpack their curiosity. Yeah, I just want to hear your guys' thoughts with this concept of curiosity.
sure. Tom, do you have anything to share on that topic?
Well, I mean, I sometimes have this sense that that I have like a more curiosity than another person, right? and more capacity for it, and maybe that I've practiced it more. And I'm not saying that that makes me better or worse. That's not what I'm saying here, but I find it's really hard to know whether it's an innate thing or whether it's something that I've practiced. It's really, yeah, I'm finding this question that you're asking, Phaon, is kind of stumping me, because it's kind of both, right? It's like of course it's an innate human capacity, like it's part of, you know, part of what we are as primates, is this, like, we're wondering about the world and what's around us, and like looking at it and trying to work out how it affects us or could affect us, or how it could help us or our family, or, you know, those sorts of things. But like anything, if you practice it, of course it will become, you know, get deeper. Your curiosity will become deeper or wider, or you know, you see people who are virtuosos in music or something, and they just become so, like, they're so curious about music, they sink so deep and find in or get into all the little details about music, but they couldn't give a shit and are not curious at all about, you know, for example, their physical body or food. They don't care at all about that, and they're not curious. They don't want to even open that door, but they just have put all of that energy and curiosity into this thing that they care about. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, Tom, on kind of a more general, like the curiosity as a general approach, as opposed to this thing that I'm describing here with this getting deep into a topic. Because I know that's been definitely your point of view. Your kind of approach is more as a more general, like applying it more generally over life. And of course, you sunk into deep movement practice as well. But you know, I know you think about these things as a much more general tool. So, what do you think?
I actually think it connects with what I was talking about before. That opening mode is it's an inherently curious mode. And you said this is a human thing, it's a primate thing. Well, it's an animal thing. It's maybe even just a life thing. Absolutely. Which is the plants moving toward the light. They're curious. Maybe it's better over there. And animals do the same thing, peeking around the corner. Is it safe? Is it not? That we have this exploratory system in us. And it's the opposite of the fear system. Or maybe not the fear system, but the security system. Like, we have home, right? And the reason we like home is we know exactly how it is. And we don't need to be curious about it. We've mapped it out really nicely. I know what's in every room. I know what's in every drawer. I know the place. It's completely familiar. And that provides security and safety. And I get to just relax. It's like serotonergic. It puts me into a state of relaxation. Yeah. Of maybe not relaxation is perhaps the wrong word, of contentment. The world is how I'd like it to be now. Everything's okay. Opposite of anxiety, right? And then you have this other exploratory mode, which is more dopaminergic, which is what's out there, what else is around. It's more future oriented, right? And it's if that serotonergic, safe, home, secure, everything's okay, if that's the opposite of anxiety, then the dopaminergic, exploratory, curious mode is the opposite of depression. Because depression is things aren't going to get better, things are only getting worse or staying the same, and they're terrible, and that's a complete closing, right? The future's going to be terrible. Anxiety is like the present. Now it's terrible already, or perhaps you're feeling guilt about the past, or remorse of some kind. So I think it actually kind of it's another word for that mode of operating, which is the opening, the love mode, to use a woo-woo term, but I think it is the best term for it. That curious, exploratory mode. And I totally agree with you regarding being curious. I think it's an inherent thing, right? And that you can practice. It comes back to attention, which we spoke about in the very beginning, and intention. You can shine the curiosity in different directions. You can choose breadth at certain times. You can choose depth at other times. And I think we feel the most engaged when we're at least doing one of those things. And it's definitely something you can cultivate. Like, a good practice for curiosity is to ask questions. And it's something I need to work on because I'm too busy answering them, or answering my own questions, but to ask questions and genuinely want to like be genuinely open to hearing the answer, because everything's interesting if you pay attention to it. As soon as you put your attention to something with curiosity, it's interesting. I'm looking at this microphone I've got here, and it's like, it's interesting. I've never been curious about it, but now that I am, it's interesting. So maybe I'll get really into microphones, but it's like, maybe I won't. So it's something to tinker with intentionally, and to, again, observe what's happening for yourself. I think about fixing and opening variables. Like sometimes I need to fix some variables down. Well, pretty much always. You get in those those fortunate places where what you had found on your trip, which is like everything's open, right? Except you did fix what you did in the morning. You fix that variable, yeah? Because it's like everything open, maybe too much. Okay, do the same thing every morning. Good, bit of relief. Some of the anxiety goes away. And at other times, everything's completely fixed. You know exactly how tomorrow is going to look. It's going to look just like today, and today look just like yesterday. And that's too much. That's too much fixity. So tinkering and opening up, okay, I'm going to fix my movement practice and open up. I'm going to invest some attention in musicality, right? Or, okay, I've done enough of that. Let me fix that, and I'll just keep playing the songs I already know and open up this other variable, which is thinking about how to be a good father. Okay, I feel like I'm doing a good job of that. Fix that variable for a while. So you're kind of like shifting your attention in different directions, becoming curious, building a new skill set and a new series of habits, perhaps, a new automatic mode, and then leaving that alone and shifting your attention somewhere else, shifting it somewhere else, shifting it somewhere else. This has been my experience, moving from thing to thing and trying to get better. Pat had asked a question here, which was, it's a while up, and the biggest challenge for me to overcome with self-development. Maybe it's choosing when to shift away, choosing when to shift to something else, or choosing when to, okay, now it's not about my development, it's about someone else's development. That's the most challenging thing always, I think, and it comes back to Phaon's point about intuition. You don't really know which direction you should be, you should be putting your curiosity. Pat dropped a comment. Pat should have just stayed in the chat, but I guess he's cooking while he's listening and commenting.
Yeah.
So curiosity equals attention plus enthusiasm. Enthusiasm from the meaning attached to what you were being curious about. Yeah, I like that.
You mentioned about the dopamine, Tom, and I've been listening to a lot of the Andrew Huberman podcast, right?
Yeah.
And he also
too.
talks about dopamine being the molecule of motivation. So I also wonder whether your capacity to be curious is very affected by your earlier childhood experiences of whether when you were curious, you had a positive experience, such as Tom, you started practicing the guitar. At first, it sort of stuck. You sucked at it, but for whatever reason, you made the choice to keep on continuing, and then you would have got that feedback loop of saying, oh, like something's changing. I'm starting to get this. And then that dopamine hit, it's like a cycle which just keeps on building and building and building. And I want to link this through to what you were talking about as well, which is like being curious in a domain, like domain specific, versus being like a curious individual. And that crossover, I think, is also very interesting, because some people don't cross over, right? They just go, this is my thing. I just like being curious about or searching the ins and outs of everything within this, but say something about cooking, I don't really give a shit. I just don't care, right? And then there's other people who their eyes light up with everything that they do, and they can be curious about everything. So yeah, I wonder, is that just because they've been shaped by different experiences of reward, especially maybe earlier in life as well, which then has motivated their actions to continue with like a certain practice or a certain curiosity?
Yeah, actually it's the specification is very much temperamental. I think that some people just by nature prefer variety and others by nature prefer, depth and expertise in one particular domain. I don't know if you can change that so much. Maybe you can, What I try to do, and I'm not great at this, but it's something that at least I am aware of not being good at and would like to change, is noticing when it's a time to be curious. If you're in a conversation, an open conversation with someone, you have an opportunity almost always to be curious. And this conversation is a little bit different because we have an intention. We say, well, we're going to talk about, we put a container around it and said it's going to be about this, right? But if we hadn't done that, then maybe if I managed it, I would just be curious. What can Phaon share with me? What can Tom share with me? What can Patrick share with me? We usually don't give ourselves the time to do that. And this is something that I have definitely made the mistake of and continue making the mistake of doing, which is putting so much time into the things I'm already curious about and investing in that depth such that there's just no time to be curious about anything else. And you're repeating and repeating and repeating and getting those dopamine hits, right? And getting the rewards for yourself. And then you shift out of that activity, and now it's a moment to actually just be present with someone else and curious about how their day unfolded. Maybe it's you talking with your wife, your partner at the end of the day, or talking with a family member, they've given you a call, but you're still on the loop of your curiosity about the conversation we had last night or the conversation we're going to have later, the topic of that you're not there for it, you're not present for it. So that's tricky, man. Definitely not the expert on managing that well, but I'm happy that I'm at least aware of it, and perhaps it'll be definitely something to work on.
I think that requires the practice, right? To have it's like the initial hump of inertia of going this is a bit hard or this sucks. Whether it's like a difficult conversation or a topic that you're not initially interested in, maybe just because you don't know anything about it. Sometimes that's just the case, right? But then bringing it back to what you were talking about before, having that awareness of going, my natural inclination is just to switch off and to think about something else, or to think about, when is my next, movement practice session going to be? Because I'm definitely a lot more curious about that versus going, actually, there's an opportunity here. Maybe I can ask another question or tune in a bit more, notice something else, and then curiosity or the dopamine hit might come, and then I might start actually getting more curious, because I think I definitely have the tendencies for sure of then being domain specific, because you're I'm becoming competent in this thing as well. Feels really, really nice. When I'm exposed to another context container, it's you always feel it. You're I don't really want to do it. And then that takes practice to be actually, I should just explore it at least a little bit to see what happens.
Yeah, maybe
I've always loved. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say that I've always loved finding someone. Just for example, some of the students that come to Praxis are really into the coffee world, and I'm curious about it a little bit because I drink coffee and it's nice to drink nice coffee, but I'm not going to get into I'm not going to spend the time and practice and those things to get really deep like these guys are. But I just absolutely love hearing about and learning and asking questions from those people, because they get to share their curiosity with you, and even if it's not something that I'm going to go and practice myself or actually become curious about myself, I can be really curious about that person. And I think that's kind of a way, this challenge that you're talking about, Tom, that's like a way into that. And you can become curious, and anything is interesting when you, as you already said, anything is interesting when you're asking questions. Like that microphone of yours, I could tell you lots about microphones from my days in the music world, but there's a whole depth of knowledge.
I'm not
We're not going to
interested.
talk about that now.
Yeah, I didn't care about that. I didn't care about
Well, not anymore. Maybe 10 minutes ago.
that. Yeah, it's there's a patience there and a presence there that's required. The patience to just, it almost comes back to what Pat mentioned earlier about efficiency. Like, curiosity is not knowing what you're trying to get out of something. That's what curiosity feels like. Yeah, and that efficiency, working towards something, the extraction mindset, you know what's going to come of it. I had this realization for myself recently, which is, man, it's been a long time since I've really not known what I'm trying to get out of what I'm doing, you know, at all. That's where travel is like such a fantastic experience, because you don't know what you're trying to get out of it. But even then we fall into the trap when we go, I did Munich and I did Berlin, and like you extracted the experiences that you wanted to get out. You know, it's like, shifting out of that extraction mode, trying to get something always. Sometimes you need to be in it, and for sure, like, it's a necessary mode to be in. But for me, this whole self-development thing is about, it's about adaptability. It's about noticing that mode that I'm in the habit of being, of trying to extract certain things, even out of this conversation, is not the optimal mode all of the time. My mode is not optimal all of the time. So what I'm striving for, as the kind of from the generalist perspective, is to discover a more optimal mode to be in from moment to moment. So maybe this is the way we can kind of tie a knot on the conversation, which is, you know, before this conversation, I took the dogs for a walk through the neighborhood, and that requires a certain mode of being. There's a good way to do that, and there's a less good way to do that. And the way we're conversing now, this puts us in a certain mode, and that's not the same as the mode that is best for me to walk the dogs through the neighborhood. And then after that, I was hitting the heavy bag at the gym, and that's a very different mode from walking the dogs. You don't want to walk the dogs with your hitting the heavy bag energy, right? And then I came straight from that into this conversation, and maybe I've hit the conversation with the heavy bag energy, and that mode is not optimal here. And I'll go from this conversation to dinner with my wife, and if it's all just, well, this is the way I do things, through all of those varied activities, the chances of that being optimal, and when I say optimal, it's like better for everyone. For you, there are fewer people suffering, things unfold in a way that's better for you and for everyone around you. The chances of that singular mode of operating being optimal across all the domains is so low. And I think this is the benefit of experiencing varied things, varied physical practices, varied everything, is that they expose you. I've only got this one answer, right? Like you said earlier, Phaon, about having options, discovering that you have options, that there are two paths, not just one. I think that's the thread at the very beginning, like putting yourself in situations that are unfamiliar so that you can see that your familiar mode of operating, your habits, don't serve you in those circumstances. And then maybe at some point you shine the mirror back, right? You reflect back and notice they're not even serving me in my familiar circumstances. Maybe this is something that happens with all of us, right? Man, that mode doesn't work in these new relationships I'm forming with people that want the best for me. It's not even working in the relationships I already have. I need to change. And then just building up from the ground up, you know. Watch yourself, become aware of what you're doing. Pause, insert a pause, right? This is so key. Just don't immediately respond. Give yourself an opportunity to make a decision, and then make the decision that sends you in the direction you imagine would be better, right? And do that over and over and over and over and over again. And then, but that's, you don't just respond the same way. Every moment, every time something arises, you have the opportunity to respond. You insert the pause until you've built that habit of responding in a way that's better for everyone. And I don't know a better way of moving forward. Like if everyone did that, how good would things be if we all responded in the best way we possibly could to everything that arose? And we all know that we're not, right? And this is like, I'm sure if we have reason to listen back to this conversation 5 years from now, we'll just be like smacking our heads. Hopefully, right? And 5 years after that,
hopefully, yeah, I hope so. Yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully, because if I'm like, yeah, I had it right, then the process stopped. The process of becoming stopped and stagnated.
Well, this is about like the development of perspective, right? And to tie it back into the movement practice, I think one of the most fundamental shifts that occurred for me with learning more about movement practice or about practice is about the use of different perspectives, how you can do a certain task, such as the get up and down on the floor, like task, but then with several rule changes, it can be completely different, or with a different perspective of going like, all right, I want to be the most efficient in terms of getting up and down. The outcome or the action of that will be completely different to if you're going, no, I just want to explore ways of going up and down. And I really love that. And there's something about that here with this self-development, which is about like, I think about how powerful, you have this self, and it's like you talk about consciousness and consciousness. That's like your ever-changing perspective, and then all it takes is like a different experience to occur, where then you are forced to. It's like this calibration where you're either forced to adopt a new perspective, or you can consciously or unconsciously choose to reject that new piece of information and hold on to this perspective that you've had from before, right? And so that's like almost like the rejection or the acceptance of growth. And I really love how in the movement practice that we're just with anything that we do, and with the practice, you have this focus on like, or what perspective am I adopting now? And that can be changing all the time as a consistent reminder that it's almost like the scientific approach, right? Like everything can be true and everything can be wrong. And it's just all a matter of perspective. And I think for me, that really helps me in terms of like operating within this world as well, because we're a world of 8 billion different perspectives, and in this conversation of self-development, I think that's almost like for me one of the key intentions that I try and hold for developing myself is just to be open to these other perspectives, either from allowing myself to shift into new perspectives, or for other outside perspectives, such as both your guys' perspectives in this conversation, allowing that to change my perspective.
I think that's a beautiful way of describing it. Yeah.
I heard a really interesting description, a really nice description of what science is. They're really, I think, fitting here, which is that science is essentially the practice of trying to be progressively less wrong over time.
Yeah, if you're going to ask one question of yourself, it's, what if I'm wrong?
Yeah.
What if I'm wrong? Speaking of, I think if anyone who's survived, we have a few people still around. If anyone has any questions or comments, we might respond to them and wrap up in 9 minutes. We've been going for it'll be a couple of hours, or wrap up now.
Mm-hmm.
But so, Jakob, can everyone see the questions?
I can see them. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Jakob is online, which is cool. I didn't notice that. Hey, Jakob. He said,
Hey.
We are talking about growth in many different ways, but how can we have our practice sustainable? I guess I'll take it. I guess I'll take that. I think there are certain things that are good to put into maintenance mode, and they just require constant attention. We've got a bunch of plants in the studio, and if they don't get water, you can't just water them once a year a lot and expect them to survive. They need to be maintained. So they need just a little bit of attention once a week, twice a week, and then maybe every 3 months, 6 months, they need a lot of attention. They need repotting. They need to be wiped down or whatever. Every now and then they need a little more attention, and that our practices can be the same. Definitely my experience has been, and I think this is universal, it's not just mine, but I suppose I can only really speak on my experience, has been investing a lot of time in the beginning, like really trying to go deep early in that growth, with that growth mindset allows you to, like, if you spend a lot of time learning to ride a bike, then you come back to it, it's just like riding a bike, right? But if you've only ridden a bike once, it's not just like riding a bike. You have to relearn it every time. So that's a way, that can be a simple strategy for sustainability. Is I've got all these things that I notice I need to check in once a month, once a week, once every 6 months, once a year in order to maintain them. There are these other things that need a daily check-in, and that might be the meditation practice. And basically that the more time you invest in one big chunk, like maybe you have one project that you're really sinking your teeth into. If you can do that for a time, and it might be 3 months, it might be 6 months, it might be 12 months, it might be 5 years, it really depends, then it takes less to maintain that down the track. And I think that's where the opening and closing of variables can be useful. So I'm not sure if that answers the question, Jaco. Do either of you two have anything to add that might help answer that question? How to balance sustainability and growth?
Yeah, I have another interpretation of or to answer that question, another approach which is on like an almost an energetic model. So when I think of sustainability, I think about like really how can sustain energy for the long term so that you can keep on doing what you want to do. And so putting aside like acquisition of skill or competency or anything like that, I think that's another thing. It's like for when I think about like practice, and if we're going to talk about physical practice and sustainability, I really think about in terms of like energy generation and then energy output. And in energy generation, you can talk about the normal things such as like health, food, sleep, all that sort of thing. But then, even just the social company that you keep, because that can generate energy for you. The surroundings of your environment, such as like your living conditions, your habitual patterns along the day, really determine how much energy you can normally generate. And then with your movement practice, that can sit somewhere between the line of energy generating, or sometimes it can be like an energy output as well, right? And so learning how to modulate that according to, I guess, one, like alignment to what you really want to learn, because I think sometimes when you're really enthusiastic about what you really want to learn, you can walk away feeling, like supercharged all the time and being like, oh, yeah, that was really, really good. Going, sometimes to exciting things such as like this concert that you really wanted to go to can be very like energy generating. So you can look at like all these sort of factors that can help bring energy into your life. But then on the other side of it, you have to be quite careful with like your energy outputs, because if you don't have enough energy, we all know what happens then. But on the flip side, when you have too much energy as well, that can also be not good, because then you become really restless. You can have this feeling of like, I feel bored because like I have this resource and I don't know how to spend it as well. So then in terms of that, we need to be intentional with the boundaries that we draft up and create. And if you use the example of a movement practice, then that's where, you know, having a plan, or at least like sort of orientations, can help draw that boundaries so that you can help focus that energy, so that then maybe focusing that energy can turn that practice into not only you're outputting energy, but then generating energy at the same time, so that you're in this good state. So that's something that I actively think about in terms of on the energy balance, how I'm operating in, what are the stressors on my body as well, because it's not just like physical stressors, but, you know, there's emotional stressors, there's like relationship stressors, there's life things that happen as well, and you have to take those into account sometimes to then go, okay, well then, do I want to be really physically stressing my body to like 110% that in my mind I really want to do, because I want to get that, you know, full depth handstand push up? Actually, you know, the smart thing to do is to back off, modulate that, because I got all this other stuff on. Doesn't mean I'm not going to practice at all, but you just have to know how to shift and modulate that, so that, well, one, yeah, you don't crash out and burn out, because definitely been there, and then that's not sustainable. So that's probably my approach or answer to that question. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing beats the awareness and being open to playing with reality. Just that's how you answer those questions for yourself. Just,
yeah,
am I aware? Am I not? It might be that you're better off getting after the handstand push-up because everything else in your life is not going the way you want it to. But that's one thing where you can go like, well, I'm putting energy into this, and even though that's giving me energy, or at least it's giving me a sense of control. Tom, I cut you off.
Well, I was going to say is that when I read that question about sustainability of practice, I couldn't help but think about it as sustainability of the curiosity. So like for me, going back to my practice in music, I spent many years practicing guitar and I kind of got to a point where I felt that I was hitting this plateau with my ability, with my learning and new stuff happening, and I was getting a bit bored. And I was like, started to practice less. And then all of a sudden, this other thing came up, and it was singing. And then I went into singing for a while, and that expanded again. And then my musical practice kind of grew. And it's sort of, I guess all I would say, you know, in adding to what you guys have said about sustainability of practice, is that I think sometimes we can get really focused on, you know, the handstand push up and kind of forget to have that, like the broader view of like what am I doing here in a larger sense. And I think we can find sustainability if we're kind of feeling that the energy dipping, the energy and the curiosity dipping for that, you know, the handstand push up, then maybe one, it's time to, you know, push harder on that and like really try to go for it and see if you can, you know, get over the hump. Or two, it might be time to go, oh, well, what about this other thing that's sort of slightly off, that's actually expanding my practice in another direction, that's like opening more, you know, more curiosity, more, you know, just a more open view of what it is that you're trying to sustain, you know. It's just be what I'd add to what you guys have said about sustainability of practice.
Yeah, I love that. You're sustaining your curiosity. You're not sustaining the physical skills or the particular attributes, or you're just sustaining the capacity to grow. And if you can orient from that place, that maybe gives you clearer answers to your questions. Then if you're attached,
and then maybe
to
years
whatever,
later you come back.
Yeah.
You come back and hit that handstand up again.
Exactly. Or maybe you won't. Who knows?
Yeah.
Curious.
Yeah, who knows? Exactly.
All right. I'm going to have to leave. It's been a couple of hours at this. Who's around? Pleasure, Jakob.
Absolutely.
People. Well, thanks for hanging around, guys. I can see some of you here from the very beginning, which is amazing. Oh, yeah, cool. Yes, working out versus practice. Yeah, totally. That's a good point. Yeah, they're different modes. And that's a nice like corresponding distinction. Working out being the I know what I'm extracting, practice maybe being the I don't know. Let's see. Cool. Thanks, guys. Well, thanks for your time, for you too, and also for people listening, of course. I found this conversation good.
Yeah, it's good.
I feel fueled,
Yeah.
Enjoyable.
having heard you guys share your stories.
Yeah, thanks so
me
much
too.
for. Well, I don't know who exactly organised it, whether it was you, Pat, or Tom, or combined effort, but thanks to you both for co-hosting, and yeah, no, I think this is interesting format as well. Instagram Live with multiple people as well, so I think there's something in
Yeah, it's like a chat room.
there.
Hey, Marco.
Yeah, past my bedtime.
Yeah,
It's
me
past
too.
my dinner time.
Yeah.
It's actually dinner time, and then it'll be bedtime. All right, guys. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.
Yeah.